January 1943. The skies over the Solomon Islands tremble beneath the roar of engines. The humid Pacific air clings thick to the skin, and a wall of storm clouds hangs low like a gray curtain of war. In the distance, a tight formation of Mitsubishi A6M fighters slices through the mist, graceful, precise, and deadly. The Japanese pilots do not yet know that just beyond those clouds, American gunners are waiting with a tactic unlike anything they've ever faced. The metallic hulls of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators vibrate against the cold wind. The air smells of aviation fuel and gun oil, sharp, heavy, unforgettable. Inside those bombers, a handful of young American gunners sit in silence, fingers hovering over the triggers of their Browning M250 caliber machine guns. The rhythmic hum of engines pulses through the fuselage like a heartbeat. For months, Japanese pilots believed they understood how the Americans fought. They were certain that the legendary speed and maneuverability of the Zero would always allow them to strike first. Their tactic was brutally simple: a fast, straight dive, a frontal attack, and a clean kill before American guns could find their mark. For the early part of the Pacific War, it worked, but that belief was about to collapse. A quiet revolution had begun months earlier at Eglin Air Base, Florida. American test pilots and ballistics experts spent hundreds of hours studying the flight paths of enemy aircraft. They discovered a simple, devastating truth. At high closing speeds, the bullets fired directly at the Zero almost always fell short. It wasn't the guns that were failing. It was the way they were aimed. The answer wasn't more firepower. It was time. American gunners began training not to shoot where the enemy was, but where it would be. They learned to aim into empty sky, a few meters ahead of the fast-moving target, so that when the Zero arrived, it would fly straight into a storm of lead. Now, over the Solomon Islands, the trap was set. As the Zeros approached, the American gunners lifted their barrels not toward the sleek fighters, but past them, to a patch of empty air. From the cockpits of the Japanese planes, many pilots smirked. The first streams of tracer fire appeared to miss widely. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. In the next heartbeat, 3 Zeros erupted into fire. A rain of 50 caliber rounds, fired seconds earlier into what had seemed like nothing, tore through their fragile airframes. One pilot yanked hard on the control stick, but his left wing was already gone. The plane spiraled into the sea. Wave after wave of Zeros fell. Their tactic, the one they had relied on since Pearl Harbor, was suddenly meaningless. The Zero, for all its speed, had paper-thin armor and unprotected fuel tanks. Even a near miss could turn it into a ball of flame. One Japanese survivor would later describe it. "We saw their bullets pass us. Then suddenly everything burned. We could not understand how they shot at a place we had not yet reached." The method would later be known informally among U.S. crews as shooting the shadow. It was brutally effective. U.S. Army, Air Force's data showed that after adopting lead-fire techniques, bomber crews doubled their kill ratios, jumping from roughly 1.1 to over 2.4.1 against the Zeros in just 3 months. This wasn't just a tactical shift. It was a display of what America could bring to war: industry, calculation, and relentless adaptation. Where Japan relied on speed and daring, America brought machines, mathematics, and a quiet kind of precision. Inside the bombers, one object came to symbolize that power: the heavy Browning ammunition box. Weighing nearly 15 kilograms, it slid and rattled against the steel floor with every turn. Click, click, click. The metallic rhythm echoed through every gunner's memory. That box was more than steel. It was Detroit. It was the hands of thousands of factory workers. It was the idea that war could be won not just by bravery, but by outthinking the enemy. Each box represented thousands of work hours, thousands of bullets, and the weight of an entire industrial empire. For the Japanese pilots, the downing of their aircraft was more than a tactical loss. It was the cracking of a myth, the belief that skill and courage alone could defeat a mechanized superpower. Within weeks, intelligence reports from Japan spoke of growing fear among Zero units. Pilots no longer dove at bomber formations with the same confidence. The hunters had become the hunted. A Japanese naval officer wrote on February 2, 1943, "They no longer shoot at us, they shoot at our future." That single line captured the psychological turning point in the Pacific Air War. The effects rippled outward. In less than 6 months, Japanese air superiority began to erode. America's factories kept producing, and its gunners kept shooting, not at the present, but at where the enemy was going to be. For the young gunners, most barely 23 years old, victory didn't feel like triumph. It was a calculation fulfilled. Each bullet that crossed the sky was a bet placed seconds ahead of time. And when the enemy collided with it, they knew their training had worked. At night, when the engines went quiet, the sound of the empty ammo box still echoed in their ears. No cheering, no parades, just the hollow rattle of a cymbal that had carried them through the storm. In the years that followed, this method became standard training across the U.S. Air Force. New recruits were taught to aim at the shadow before the man arrives. They learned that in aerial combat, victory belongs not to the fastest, but to the one who thinks 3 seconds ahead. The Pacific War raged on, but for many Japanese pilots, their faith in the invincibility of the Zero was broken. The sky no longer belonged to them. For America, this was the beginning of uncontested air dominance. That day, over the gray Solomon Islands, history was not written with speeches or grand strategy. It was written in invisible trajectories, lines of lead arcing toward the future. Lines that could not be seen, but could not be escaped. Epilogue. War, in the end, is not just blood and bullets. It's about who can see farther ahead. A single rattling ammo box on a bomber floor became the sound of America. The sound of machines, of calculation, of the future itself. Over the Pacific, Japanese Zeros didn't just fall to gunfire. They fell to a nation that had learned to aim at tomorrow. And when future generations study this war, they will not only remember who was shot down, they will remember who learned to shoot where the enemy was going to be.